Hey everybody, welcome to the weekly market wrap. My name is Gareth Soloway, Chief Market Strategist here at verifiedinvesting.com. So we have a day where the markets look like they're going to end green. It was a little bit of an iffy one, kind of late afternoon after we heard that talks for a trade deal with Canada have fallen apart. And again, the question there is anything recuperable, meaning do we get a trade deal at some point or is it done? And does this embolden other countries to kind of stand firm and not go for trade deals? And obviously, those deadlines are coming up in basically just over a week for those trade deals in between the US and other countries. In addition, today we got the PCE data out, the PCE data, which is the favored gauge for inflation by the Federal Reserve. It did show a little bit of an uptick higher than expected in core, which is minus food and energy inflation. So again, not the greatest of news, but remember, we are in animal spirits in terms of the market and the appetite for buyers in the market to just accumulate at any cost. And we're also looking at a pre-holiday week. Basically, next Friday, the markets are closed in observance of July 4th, Independence Day here in the U.S. All right, let's get into the charts and see what is going on. This is the S&P 500. So you can see we opened higher today on the S&P from yesterday. And by the way, this is the 10-minute chart. So each candle is 10 minutes long. Here again, we early in the day rallied higher, 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 then began to fade. And this is where we heard about Canada and the talks for a trade deal falling apart, and the markets kind of cascaded lower. But the markets into the end of quarter. Now, granted, Monday is technically the end of quarter, but again, you are seeing window dressing buying up the mega cap players as the institutions look to make those statements at end of quarter look pretty for their investors. So they are putting money to work, and you're seeing a beautiful buy into the end of the day, lifting us back up. Now, if we go to the daily chart, take a look at this, guys. Here is your retrace to the scene of the crime trend line. Again, we were bobbing along this line right here. We broke down, and you do your natural retrace, and we came up underneath that line right there. So we kind of kissed just below 6,200. We didn't officially tag it, so keep that in mind. But again, that's where we kind of stalled out. Then we had our pullback, and now we're seeing a rally into the end of the day. The S&P is up right now with about 2 minutes to go in the trading day, 0.5%. But again, a green day on Wall Street, even in spite of worse than expected inflation. In other words, hotter inflation and a trade deal with Canada potentially falling apart. Market, again, has a lot of animal spirits, and that is coaxing investors to worry about nothing and buy everything. All right, couple other charts to go over today in the weekly wrap up. Here's your QQQ. Qs are up less than the S&P. I think that's kind of interesting because usually the Nasdaq leads the market in terms of percentages. But again, we are seeing the S&P leading up 0.5%, while the Nasdaq is only up about 0.4%. So it's almost equal, but definitely a little bit weaker here. Here is your retrace to the scene of the crime trend line. So we still could go up a little bit more into the July 4th holiday late next week. And that would be up about, looks like from current levels here, to about 558. So you'd be talking about $10 more on the QQQ as a max upside extension move. Now, one thing I want to talk a little bit about, guys, is there is something out there that is giving us a warning sign. Well, let's be fair. There's many things out there that are concerning, but one of them is the market breadth. Now, you might say, well, what does that mean? Well, it basically means that while the S&P has been going up and the Nasdaq's going up, the overall larger market, meaning all the other stocks, are not participating. All right, they are stalled out. Now, how do you know that? Well, simply go to the Russell 2000 chart. This is the Russell 2000, guys. Now, the Russell 2000 is mainly the smaller companies, the small caps, the regional banks. And so while we're seeing JP Morgan near all-time highs and Meta near all-time highs, NVIDIA making new all-time highs, look at this, guys. This is incredible how the Russell has lagged. Now, if you look at the Russell, the high in November was here. We are, again, if we do a measurement on this, based off today's close, we are still almost 14% away from all-time highs on the Russell. And again, keep in mind, this is the biggest index of stocks that, again, we've gone over here. We have the S&P, which is 500 stocks, the Nasdaq 100, which is 100 stocks, And here the Russell is 2,000 stocks. And so what this tells us is that the breadth of the market is not as wide ranging as many would think. Essentially, it tells us that the mega caps and the large caps are leading this market higher while it's leaving behind many of the other companies. So again, I just bring that up as a cautionary signal there for us to kind of follow and just be aware of. Now, listen, could the Russell rally? I mean, it does have like a little inverse head and shoulders. Maybe that's the next one to kind of light on fire and go. But right now, we certainly are not seeing a broad-based rally in the markets encompassing small caps along with large caps. Looking at the US dollar was basically flat today, just holding below this key trend line. So it's still in potential breakdown mode. And the 10-year yield, the interest rate on the 10-year, was up a little bit after falling pretty much for the last 7 straight trading days until today. Again, this breakdown likely means we are headed lower. Now, the SMH today remains in our warning zone. You can see from gap fill right here. There's a gap fill here to the double top up here. We are right in the midst. You did put in a doji candle today on the SMH, which sometimes can be a reversal signal. But obviously, again, we want to watch and see if we get that follow through to the downside at some point. And then obviously we have NVIDIA's chart. NVIDIA was actually, as semiconductors go, a lot of semis were flat to negative today, but NVIDIA really caught a bid as the biggest company out there, again, nearing a $4 trillion valuation. And you can see, again, NVIDIA was up about 1.77% on the day. Now, if we look at this chart, what do we see here? We see a trend line going back to June of 2024, so 1 year ago, with these highs. And what does this tell us? It tells us that NVIDIA, if it gets up to this level, which, by the way, is only $6 higher than current levels. So we're talking about, 4% higher or so. If it gets up there, you would expect a rejection off of that level. That should be, based on technical analysis and probabilities, that should be significant resistance on the chart. All right, other stocks out there, we can take a look at Meta today. Meta continued to climb up here, nearing its double top. You have kind of the same sort of resistance zone here, which we've now punctured into, but we'll see how we get, when we get, or if we get to the all-time highs. And then Microsoft, look at this. You have this little parallel here. It's a very tight range on Microsoft. It got rejected off the high end of that parallel, coming back in a little bit. The key on Microsoft is, honestly, it could continue to grind up inside of this parallel. What you're watching for on this is when it breaks this trend line here, right? When this gets broken, the bottom of the parallel, that's when the bottom should fall out and we should see a bigger corrective move. And then JP Morgan, guys, this is a great trend line. JP Morgan was down a little bit today, but look at this trend line on JPM. Beautiful high pivot going back to 2021 through the high pivot in February and early February and mid-February here. And then what did we kiss just in the last day right there? And a small pullback in JP Morgan Chase today. All right, on to Bitcoin we go. Bitcoin flattish today. Again, is it concerning that Bitcoin is not making new all-time highs with the S&P and the Nasdaq making new all-time highs? I would say a little bit. Now, sometimes we can see Bitcoin play catch-up, but again, you could also look at it and say, are people being more risk adverse? Like, is something on the horizon here that's making individuals not want to chase altcoins, which remain near 52-week lows like many of them do, and Bitcoin, which has really topped out? I mean, Bitcoin topped out in mid-May, right? May 23rd. And so we're basically a month ago from Bitcoin's top out. And I'm not going to get into it here, but if you want to do a little lesson, look back at the 2021 high, and Bitcoin topped out 4 to 6 weeks before the stock market. And then go back to 2017 and you'll see the same thing. 4 to 6 weeks before the stock market started to roll over, Bitcoin topped out as well. And again, I'm not saying that that's going to exactly happen here. We don't know yet, but it's just something that's making me a little uneasy with this market, especially when we look at the S&P and we know that the S&P, while it did hit a new all-time high today, no doubt about it, in fact, closed at a new all-time high, it is underneath this retrace. And what we know about retraces to the scene of the crime is you break down, then you retrace and kind of test that same trend line again. And then oftentimes you'll get your bigger pullback in the market. So again, I'm watching very, very closely here. Gold today did take a tumble down about 50 bucks on the day per ounce. Notice again, we closed just on or below this trend line. Watch on Monday to see if we confirm a breakdown on gold. If we confirm a breakdown on gold on Monday, your first stop should be around 3150 here, followed by potential downside to about 2950 to 2970. Those would be your two key levels of technical support. Silver today, what did we see on silver here? Silver was down after a couple updates. Really, silver's just started to chop sideways here again. I still like a buyable level here at 34.50, but it just hasn't come back there. So I'm just patiently waiting to see what happens. And then if we look at oil, oil had a major tumble this week. And what's interesting about oil is since that tumble, it really hasn't bounced much. Like, really, it's gone to sleep here. Now, I did go long on oil down here after being short up here. And we made great money on the short side, both on some put options as well as on the SCO, being long the SCO, which is a short 2X USO play. But I did flip it into a UCO. And so far, we're basically flat on that trade. I mean, there's not much going on there. I still think we should bounce, but I have to monitor this because, again, if it forms a good bear flag with a time count, it could honestly start to break down. So we got to watch that very, very closely. And then lastly, natural gas, guys. Nat gas, great bounce, folks. I did go long yesterday. As I mentioned, if you're in my commodity service, we picked up Boyle on the long side, which is a leveraged long on natural gas. What a pop. I did take profits on that. But again, just a great rally on nat gas. Notice how many days down in a row. Now we're getting that bounce. Eventually, I do think it rolls over and comes down here. But in the near term, at least, again, a good bounce there. So listen, next week, we're going to get some economic data. We have the jobs report. We have lots of stuff going on here. But overall, one of the things we're going to follow, we have to watch inflation now that it's starting to show signs of ticking up. We want to hear what the Fed is likely to do. So are there more Fed speakers? Obviously, I think the number one thing I'll be watching this weekend is what's the fallout between Canada and the US, and do we see any sort of chain reaction in other countries as they're working on trade deals? Like, is this just an isolated thing with Canada? Can it be mended? Maybe. We'll find out. And then ultimately, what do we see with other countries? Because remember, I think it's July 7th is that deadline. Now, my guess is Trump will extend that as long as there's some negotiations going on. But again, we have to follow. And then on a technical basis, we want to follow that S&P, guys. That S&P kissed the scene of the crime. It didn't tag it today. Maybe on Monday we tag it. But that's the level that I'm going to be focused on, laser focused on, to see where we go. All right, guys, as always, I appreciate you guys being members and supporting us here. Don't forget, guys, the Winning Trader series, all of our courses are on sale this 1 week. It ends this weekend. So at the end of this weekend, no more sales of 50% or greater off on the education. Learn how to fish, guys. It is the most liberating thing in the whole wide world. It changes everything about how you approach things and the money you can save and accumulate over the course of your life. Learn it, folks. It's a game changer. All right, you guys have a great weekend. I'll see you Monday bright and early for the game plan. Take care.